Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Society of Ridgewood. It's okay, we'll figure it out. We've got some technology reverbing. My name is Sarah Lenzi, and I'm the minister here at this congregation. USR has been meeting for 125 years, and for just over 60 of those, this congregation has belonged to the Unitarian Universalist Association. As a member congregation of the UUA, we affirm and promote the 7 principles, now 8, since we voted at our annual meeting last June to affirm that proposed 8th principle. You can see them here on your screen. We also affirm 6 sources of truth and inspiration. We will be exploring the sources in today's service. But just a reminder that our commitment to the principles and the sources is held within the container of covenant. Ours is not a religion of dogma or creed, but a voluntary coming together of spiritual seekers that ask questions and that always commit to being led by love and care in our community building. We covenant to be together with kindness, intention, and commitment, ever mindful of our spiritual inheritances, a belief in the interconnection of our beings, and in a love that can change the world. Here, we lovingly hold the circle wide, as we are called to by our congregational commitments to LGBTQ justice, racial justice, and environmental justice. If you are new and would like more information about USR, please visit our website or email Ann Peretti at uuridgewood.org. The email will be dropped into the chat. If you are online, feel free to also fill out the Google form that's going to be in the chat as well. If you're present here in Anderson and you're new, you can stop any of us and we'll be happy to get you connected. Friends on Zoom, we hope you'll stay for the breakout room coffee hours when the service is done. And folks here in Anderson, coffee hour will be just outside the doors as it's been the past few weeks. We will brave the cool morning air together. It is good to be with you. And now I'll invite you to please join in the words for lighting our chalice. They'll be on your screen. We light this chalice for the light of truth, the warmth of love, and the energy of action as we gather together in the circle of community. You need to unmute us. Okay, it's okay. It's all a process. Let's take another deep breath. Technology is a process. From many corners we come, bringing many hurts and hopes, joys and griefs, bringing laughter and tears, bringing many truths. We enter this time together, wisdom drawn from so many sources, from so many generations of human living, the collected wisdom of ages, and the promise of wisdom yet uncovered hangs ever in the air around us. Awaiting our open minds and hearts, we come into this time together breathing and knowing we are welcome here in this home of many truths. Breathe and listen. When we arrive in this space together, we each arrive with so many calls on our attention, so many options for how to spend our time. And yet here we are spending this time together. 1 hour, give or take. This time is set aside for contemplation, for renewal, for rest. This is a time to go deep within and to look out into the wider world. It's time to be quiet and also to speak our truths. This is time for you, and it's time for you to be in community, not alone, not isolated, but attentive to one particular call on your being, the call to be present. Present to your own life, present to the community you build, present to the world around you, present to your growth, to the love you receive and show, to the possibility for change inherent within you. In this time that we share, may we let those many insistent demands on our lives lay quiet. With minds open, hearts yearning for meaning, spirits reaching out for connection, grateful for this time together, we gather this morning. As I mentioned, this morning we're talking about the sources, and our shared Unitarian Universalism draws from many, 6 that we have articulated so far in our shared affirmation that includes also those principles. Today we'll explore those 6 sources one by one. Each is resplendent with truths. Each one calls to our individual histories, but also to the enormity of what we share. The first source we think about this morning is wisdom from the world's religions, which inspires us in our ethical and spiritual life. Now, this is an interesting one, of course, because it acknowledges all the ways that religions around the world can inspire and fulfill us, but it also treads a tight line with appropriation. We draw from the world's religions without making a mockery of them, without pretending they are ours, without co-opting their customs and cultures and truths. When I was a freshman in college, I knew I wanted to study art history, and I thought that I wanted to study European history. I signed up for a class on Asian art. It was Intro to Asian Art, and it was there in that class that it became clear to me that what I actually wanted to study was religion, because so much of the art that we were viewing, the statues and the mandalas, the rock-cut temples, were born of religious commitment. It became clear to me that our human expression of belief was the thing that most fascinated me, whether that was through art or literature or music. It's no wonder, in a way, that I ended up here, ministering in a tradition that embraces the idea that we might find wisdom from so many places. Over the years, I find myself inspired again and again by one particular story from the Hindu tradition. It's a short episode in the Mahabharata, and that episode is known as the Bhagavad Gita. I'm sure some of you have heard of this. In it, the god Krishna speaks to this man, Prince Arjuna, and explains to him that in his life, Arjuna must balance many different commitments. In this moment where they're talking, Arjuna's commitment to his family and his commitment to his identity as soldier are at odds because he's at war with one of his cousins. And the conversation is about how to weigh the various pulls that inevitably find us. To what do we owe our allegiance and when? To what do we owe our love and respect and at what cost? What do we owe our principles, our sources, our ethical commitments? From this tradition, the Hindu tradition, in many ways so different from my own, and of course so unique in its own expression, from that tradition comes a story that speaks universal truths about the human condition. This is why we draw from the source of world religions. This is why we allow ourselves the space to hear truth from the many belief systems different from ours. Because truth and wisdom are not singular, not linear, not geographically or religiously bound. They are everywhere available to us. This morning we remember that our search for truth and meaning must range wide across this vast world, exploring all the facets of human experience that we can find. I think we're about to do a hum. So if you are here in Anderson, you are invited to rise in body or spirit, however is comfortable for you, and hum. I keep getting that funny sound. And if you are home on Zoom, please sing out loud and proud. So friends in Anderson, as you are, there we go. All right.
Please join in our hymn, number 159, This Is My Song. Remember, we can't sing yet, but you can hum along. This is my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for lands afar and mine. This is my home, the country where my heart is. Here are my hopes, my dreams, my holy shrine. But other hearts in other lands are beating with hopes and dreams as true and high as mine. My country's skies are bluer than the ocean, and sunlight beams on clover leaf and pine. But other lands have sunlight too, and clover, and skies are everywhere as blue as mine. Oh, hear my song, thou God of all the nations, a song of peace for their land and for mine.
Thank you. You can be seated. It just makes me so happy to hear you humming. The next source we will look at is the words and deeds of prophetic people, which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. 12 years ago, I was gifted an extra ticket to go see Maya Angelou deliver the keynote address as part of the University of Pennsylvania's Women's Week. At 28 years old, I'd heard plenty of speeches in my life and seen more than my fair share of academic talks, and I had sat mostly still for an untold number of sermons. I had heard prophecy spoken. I had seen charisma in action. I had responded to the rallying cry to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. But if you ask me to remember with clarity and uncharacteristic for me precision, the first time I felt truly in the presence of deep, honest, intimate, vast, prophetic speech that shifted something in my own heart, I would probably say it was that day. I can picture her on the stage in this huge auditorium that somehow seemed much smaller in the moment, and I can hear her quoting Terentius, "Nothing human is alien to me." I can hear her recounting the story of being sexually assaulted and raped as a child, how when she told her brother, and her brother told the rest of the family, the man who had done it was jailed for 1 day, and how 4 days later he was murdered, she believed, by her uncles. The trauma of that incident in her life left her with selective mutism for 5 years. 5 years of not speaking because she believed that her voice, speaking this man's name, had killed him. So 5 years without her voice, a voice that then came to mean so much to generations of Americans. A voice that had been and went silent, and a voice that became again. a voice of truth-telling, of insistent prophecy. Sometimes we know the prophets among us. They are loud and proud, and they make themselves known by their turn of phrase and their passionate work. Sometimes the prophets among us are quieter, waiting, children with truth to tell, young adults just finding their voices, elder folks who have matured into an understanding of life and its rhythms that is too often lost on the young. We draw wisdom from the words and deeds of prophetic people because walking among us are those who see perhaps more clearly than we do. Those whose life experiences teach us something about the world that we didn't know before. Those whose capacity to speak passionately and effectively exceed our own. Prophecy comes sometimes as a balm to the soul and a reminder of our own power, as when the words, "Still I rise," rose from Angelou's body as a prayer, as a promise, as a declaration. Prophecy sometimes comes without words, when we watch around us those who live with complete authenticity, with honesty and grace and the kind of grounded spirit we aspire to. And prophecy comes sometimes as the painful prod to be different, be better, do more, acknowledge a hard truth, and make changes that ask much of us. So this morning, to honor this source, I share with you another prophet I've had the privilege to hear speak, prophet of our time, the Reverend William Barber. He's president and senior lecturer at Repairers of the Breach and co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign. I urge you to look both of those up. This clip is from his homily at the 59th inaugural prayer service this year, Thursday, January 21st. So please.
Well, we are in a jam today. Trouble is real, and whether we like it or not, we are in this mess together as a nation. When this word of the Lord came to Isaiah, his people were also in a jam. Bad leadership, greed, and injustice and lies had led them into trouble, exile, and economic hardship. In that day, some tried to simply cover up the trouble with false religion and deceit. But God said to the prophet, "Sound the trumpet, tell the nation of its sin, tell them that just going through the motions of prayer will not get them out of this jam. I need them to repent of what got them here and turn in a new direction." The prophet was saying what Jesus would say about nations caring for the least of these. The prophet was saying then what Franklin Delano Roosevelt said in the 1930s to an America with 1/3 of the nation ill-housed, ill-clad, and ill-nourished, besieged by the Great Depression and beset by bigotry and hatred. At such a time as this, FDR said, "The rest of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide enough for those who have too little." Isaiah was saying what Dr. King said to America when we faced a jam in the 1960s. The time has come for an all-out world war against poverty. The rich nations must use their vast resources of wealth to develop the underdeveloped, school the unschooled, and feed the unfed. Ultimately, a great nation is a compassionate nation. The prophet's basic question to the leadership of his day was the question the economist Joseph Stiglitz has asked. Not how much will it cost the government to address inequality, but how much has it cost us not to?
We also draw from Jewish and Christian teachings which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. That's the language of that next source. And this one lays the foundation for prophetic calls for a more just and equitable world, a world in which all of us thrive, the world William Barber and so many modern prophetic voices urge us to create. These teachings can help us understand the broken world we live in and the beloved world we dream of. This source holds a particular resonance for me. I have shared with you that I come from a variety of Christian and Jewish stock. My mother's father's family came from Russia during the pogroms of the early 20th century. My mother's family was Lutheran, but when a handsome Methodist tent preacher came through town, my grandmother and many of the other young women converted. That's how the story goes. My father comes from a long line of Italian Catholics, immigrants also from the early part of the 20th century. The variety of Christianity and Judaism that exists within my family is wide, and my childhood was filled with cultural traditions loosely tied to religious belief. Just yesterday, actually, my children and I were once again discussing the Bible story of Adam and Eve. We got there because I had shouted Jesus Christ when a driver cut me off in traffic, and after apologizing, Caleb asked me to remind them who Jesus was. So of course this began a nice long theological conversation about resurrection and atonement, because their mom's a minister, and what it was that humans needed to atone for. They remembered some of the stories from their brick Bible. I think I told you about this during the pandemic. It is a Bible in which the author posed Lego figures to show the scenes of all the different stories. After I recounted the origin tale of Adam and Eve, Ethan very clearly says, God was the villain in that story. I was like, yes. And as a Unitarian Universalist, it was hard to dispute. I realized that many of us come to our Unitarian Universalism with some degree of baggage from the Jewish and Christian teachings of our childhood. And I recognize that a little bit in what he said and in my reaction. But the thing is, there are also important messages about love and forgiveness, about care and miracles and redemption. So we talked about those too. We talked about that while, yes, in some stories, characters from the Bible make choices we can hardly begin to understand, and while, yes, the patriarchal, xenophobic Christianity that's born in the wake of Jesus' death visited misery on so many, there are also truths worth saving, truths worth retelling. As with every source of wisdom we draw from, there are real truths of value, and there are death-dealing lies masquerading as truths. It can be hard to parse the difference, but if we measure them against our principles, against our covenant, against our deeply held commitment to unity and to love, we may find it easier to sort the historically contextualized ideas from the perennial truths. And perennial truths are there. The Hebrew and Christian scriptures teach us about community and generosity, about mutual care. They teach us that the act of gathering is holy, and that together we can produce something more.
One of the promises we make to one another in our shared covenant at the USR is to support this congregation with our presence, gifts, and service, and to care for each other and the long-term well-being of our community. This commitment to mutual caretaking has its roots in religions all over the world, but we find a strong strain in the source that Sarah just discussed. Early Christianity, born in a climate of violence and oppression, stressed the idea of community. In his letter to the Romans, Paul writes, "For just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. We have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If it is serving, then serve. If it is teaching, then teach. If it is to encourage, then give encouragement. If it is giving, then give generously. If it is to lead, do it diligently. If it is to show mercy, do it cheerfully. And that's from Romans 12, 4 through 8. 2 millennia ago, leaders knew that each member of their congregation had gifts to share and talents to offer. And this remains true to this day. Each of you brings your unique self and your unique skills to our shared life together. So some opportunities for sharing your gifts are you can participate in greeting and in coffee hour on Sunday mornings. Or you can join the Spiritual Development Circle for a conversation on October 28th at 7:30 on Zoom as they discuss what their work will be this year. Now, in addition to sharing our gifts, our shared congregational life calls us to share our financial resources as we are able, both to support the work of this congregation and to support work of external organizations. The Hebrew scriptures lift up the idea of tzedakah, the giving of charity, many times. The prophet Isaiah declares, "Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover him and not to hide yourself from your own flesh?" This month, we are doing a collection on Reeb Porch of shoes, and that's of any condition, paired, single. So please rummage through your closet and bring some shoes by. Today's offering plate will go entirely to the operating budget of our congregation to support our mission to grow in our minds and spirit, to act with love for justice, and to transform the world. Please get in touch if you would like to volunteer your time and talents, and please give generously. The offering will now be given and gratefully received.
And just a quick reminder that here in Anderson, we're asking you to continue giving digitally, virtually. We'll not pass a plate around. Thank you. We draw not only on the religions of the world and the Jewish and Christian teachings from which our own tradition originally sprang, but also on the spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions, which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. We mark the passing of seasons, the equinoxes and the solstices. We mark the changing rhythms of life because we draw from the wisdom of generations of humans who lived in concert with those rhythms. I think often of the ways our world inhibits our connection to the earth, at least the world I live in the metro New York area. Stars are harder to see there because the ambient light impedes their presence. Fresh growth on plants is harder to smell because of the cars, the machinery, the bodies. The sound of the birds and the insects is harder to hear because of the hum of technology and the constant presence of people. This source asks us to learn from traditions closer to the ground, closer to the waters and the trees and the sky, and it asks us to pause, to take that walk through the forest or alongside the pond, to sit still under an open sky, to peer into the dark or overly bright night and seek out the truth of this universe's longevity. Near the apartment building where I live is a small patch of grass. It exists between a back roadway, most frequently used by bikers and the public safety trucks, and a set of oversized steps called the meditation steps, which face the eastern shore of the island of Manhattan, and then a ramp that connects the walkable river promenade to the back roadway. It's a small triangle, and planted there are maybe half a dozen trees. As a child, I would lie beneath those trees in every season. In winter, while the snow fell cold and wet on my cheeks, in the spring, as the blossoms came in, solidifying my lifelong love of flowering trees. In the summer, when the sun beat through the branches to cast an orange glow on everything. And in the fall, when the deep reds would come and the falling leaves would bring a quiet kind of contemplation. I think maybe I learned to love the rhythm of life under those trees, waiting for adulthood, waiting for real life, waiting for my own being to become. We draw on the spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions because they offer us a deep truth about our humanity. We are connected to the world. We don't live on it or control it. We don't own it. It isn't ours to use up and cast aside. We are of this world, connected to it, bound to it by the makeup of our beings and by the mutual love it asks of us. We forget sometimes, but we are part of the sacred circle of life, and our lives move along to the rhythms of nature, no matter how we might try to pretend otherwise. The world knows who we are, and we draw on this source to remind ourselves.
Our reading today is A Seed Knows How to Wait by Hope Jarin. A seed knows how to wait. Most seeds wait for several years before starting to grow. A cherry seed can wait for 100 years with no problem. What exactly each seed is waiting for is known only to that seed. Some unique trigger combination of temperature, moisture, light, and many other things is required to convince a seed to jump off the deep end and take its chance, to take its one and only chance to grow. A seed is alive while it waits. Every acorn on the ground is just as alive as the 300-year-old oak that towers over it. Neither the seed nor the old oak is growing. They are just both waiting. Their waiting differs, however, in that the seed is waiting to flourish while the tree is only waiting to die. When you go into a forest, you probably tend to look up at the plants that have grown so much taller than you ever could. you probably don't look down, where just beneath your single footprint sits 101,000 seeds, each one alive and waiting. When you are in the forest, for every tree that you see, there are no less than 3 million more trees waiting in the soil, fervently wishing to be. When the embryo within a seed starts to grow, it basically just stretches out of its doubled over waiting posture, elongating into official ownership of the form that it assumed years ago. The hard coat that surrounds a peach pit, a sesame or mustard seed, or a walnut's shell mostly exists to prevent this expansion. In the lab, we simply scratch the hard coat and add a little water, and it's enough to make almost any seed grow. I must have cracked thousands of seeds over the year, and yet the next day's green never fails to amaze me. Something so hard can be so easy if you just have a little help. In the right place, under the right conditions, you can finally stretch out into what you're supposed to be. Each beginning is the end of waiting. We are each given exactly one chance to be. Each of us is both impossible and inevitable. Every replete tree was first a seed that waited.
The fifth source we draw on is our direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. At times, this seems to me like the easiest source. What could be more present, more real, more alive for each of us than our own experiences? And at other times, I am mindful of just how complicated this source is, because this is the source that asks us to make meaning of the moments of our lives, acknowledging that wisdom comes from within, from the recognition of our lives as sacred texts connected to the transcendent mystery and wonder of being. And that asks us to pay a kind of attention that maybe we don't always want to. It asks us to be careful, to be open and vulnerable and courageous in our living every day. And that takes work. But too often we forget that, as Hope Yaren reminds us, something so hard can be so easy if you just have a little help. In the right place, under the right conditions, you can finally stretch out into what you're supposed to be. I know I've told you before that I often experience the mystery and wonder that renews my spirit when we stand together here in this space and raise our voices in song or speech or hum together. Something in me lifts, something stirs, something that makes me feel connected to you, but also to every soul down through time that stood side by side with someone else to proclaim truths and listen to beautiful music, be moved by prophecy. In those moments, something awakens in me, a reminder of who we are and what we are. I feel it often too when I look at my children, and I realize again that these are human lives, fresh and young, whose safety and becoming rests in my hands and in the hands of others who love them. When I realize anew that the future, how we humans will move with this earth and what wisdom we will carry forward, rests in their hands and in the hands of their generation, something awakens, a reminder of who we are and what we are. And I know I have shared with you that there are days when I walk out into the world, and for reasons I cannot comprehend, the sun seems brighter. The outline of the buildings against the sky is more crisp. The sound of the birds in the trees is louder, like existence has thrown itself into stark relief, simply to remind me that it's here, the living, breathing, pulsing beat of creation. In those moments, I feel a depth of connection that remains hard to put into words. Something awakens, a reminder of who we are and what we are. And we aren't always in the right place, and it isn't always the right time, it isn't always the right conditions. And yet, the waiting is part of the process. It's all part of the becoming. And the becoming, from the waiting to the stretching into who we are, the becoming is easier when we do it in community. When we can turn to the side and say, something stirs in me, a joy, a sorrow, a need, a fear, a hope. This source, maybe more than all the others, is so much easier to draw wisdom from when we have a little bit of help from our community. And so we will move into that time in our service, that time we take each Sunday to sit quietly, to witness to each other's lives and experiences, whether we share them aloud or make silent space to hold them in company. I invite you to come into this time experiencing all it has to offer. To just listen to my words, let your body follow along as best it can. Settle into as comfortable a position as you can find. Maybe your hands rest loosely on your knees. Maybe your eyes are closed. Roll your shoulders back. Let them drop and relax. Unclench your jaw. Let the muscles there relax too. Lower your tongue so it isn't pressing on the top of your mouth. And take a deep breath, as deep as feels safe and right for your body. Inhale through your nose, and then exhale through your mouth. Slow, deep, easy. There's no hurry, no rules about how to breathe. Only you in this moment, together with your community, breathing. As you breathe, I invite you to remember a moment when you felt a deep connection to the world. maybe lying under a tree, sitting in a service, staring at a beautiful sculpture, participating in the work of changing the world. Any moment when you felt your being connected to something larger, when you felt wonder and mystery, the unexplained, the ineffable, when you felt it crack through the facade of the everyday and enliven your spirit. Breathe. And remember such a moment when you saw everything differently, or when peace descended, or when love seemed alive in everything. Let yourself feel that feeling again. Recapture that awe of existence. Know that your experiences are truths, part of a much larger story, the whole truth of which we will never fully know. Remember how it felt to feel the joy of being alive, because being alive meant getting to feel wonder. Breathe, and in the silence, remember. All the wisdom we know tells us that those moments, when we feel our individual experience tied to the larger truth of what it means to be human, all the wisdom we know tells us that those moments can be found, not just waited for. Those moments can be cultivated, sought, brought on by a heart and mind and body that is willing to be open, by a spirit that reflects, that lives consciously, that waits not passively but actively like the seed in the ground, valuing all aspects of our shared human journey. May we know the depth of our own experience, the holiness of it, its wonder and mystery, and the wonder and mystery of all that it joins us to. So may it be. The sixth and final source from which we draw our meaning is humanist teachings which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science and warn us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. Science and reason as protection against idolatries of the mind and spirit. I love this one, though I think perhaps we need to remember that we can make idolatries of science and reason as well, when we reject any possibility of mystery and wonder, of the unknown or the beyond our knowing. But this source, in many ways, it tempers the rest. It helps us mine the rest for wisdom without falling into the trap of making untouchable, unquestionable the things we believe. Last week we discussed the principles, how they change over time, how they are designed to grow and be reconsidered. The wisdom of this source teaches us exactly that. Human knowledge is ever expanding, and so we cannot make any text or any idea utterly infallible, permanent for all time, beyond the boundaries of human interrogation. Our job as thoughtful, faith-filled, many-principled people who draw from many sources is to use our human ability to test the truths we find against the beliefs we hold, and to test those beliefs against the knowledge we share, and to create a world that reflects the best of what humanity can be. Our job, using all the wisdom we inherit and uncover and recover from all the sources we can draw on, is to live life more fully than we have done, build something better than we have known, become something more than we have been. Humanist teachings never let us forget that all of our learnings and findings, all of our science and reason should be put in the service not of wealth and individual success, but in the service of peace, generosity, kindness, joy, love, and unity. To close our service, not quite, we have a couple elements, but to celebrate this source, let's put it that way, to celebrate this final source, I want to invite you into a responsive reading. If you are here in Anderson and would like to rise, you can do so. Your part will be on the screen, and Olas will lead you along in that. This is from Henry David Thoreau. It's in our hymnal if you ever want to look it up. It's titled "To Live Deliberately." So you'll do your part along with Olas, okay? So, why should we live in such a hurry and waste of life?
We are determined to be starved before we are hungry.
I wish to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life.
I wish to learn what life has to teach and not, when I come to die, discover that I have not lived.
I do not wish to live what is not life. Living is so dear.
Nor do I wish to practice resignation unless it is quite necessary.
I wish to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life.
I want to cut a broad swath to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms.
If it proves to be mean, then to get the whole and genuine meanness of it and publish its meanness to the world.
Or if it is sublime, to know it by experience and to be able to give a true account of it.
Thank you. You can sit down. Go ahead, you're on. All of our sources point us in the same direction, toward deliberate, courageous, generous, love-filled living that recognizes our mutual accountability and the care we owe to every other being and this earth we share. I invite you to join me in the words for extinguishing the chalice, recognizing that we never extinguish the beacon that our covenant, principles, and sources lift up to guide our way. Please join in the words. We extinguish this flame, but may the light of truth, the warmth of love, and the energy of action burn bright in our hearts until we are together again. Each day may we draw on the wisdom of generations and on the wisdom that lies within each of us, sifting through what was and what is, visioning for what might yet be, and living with care and intention to bring about that hoped-for future. Go in peace.